And we're just waiting a quick second because we're going to go live on YouTube and then we'll get started. All right. So hello, everybody. In today's demonstration, we're going to be talking about just getting, into Fusion 360 with, starting to make, chips and whatnot and how you can do that faster. Today, the meeting is obviously with myself. My name is Devin Dupuis. I'm a technical specialist here at Autodesk. Before I came to Autodesk, I actually uh, managed an aerospace CNC machine shop in Chicago, Illinois, where we utilize Fusion 360 on a day-to-day basis for all of our CAM needs and also all of our CAD needs. So let's hop right into Fusion and get started. So inside of Fusion here, what I have open is just like a manufacturing template file, and in it's not going to be in the Zoom webinar today, but we also are live on YouTube. So in the YouTube video, when we do post this, you'll be able to find a Google Drive link to these parts that I'm using here today, so you could follow along and try to replicate that. So hopping into it here. This is the file we're going to be using. This file is set up with some parameters here, so we can kind of modify some of the things that we want to do in Fusion, for our setup. And this will give us a good, starting point to start from, so we can see our stock and our parallels and our vice and stuff like that. So the first thing we're going to do is when we import a file or we get a file from a customer, we'll just go up here to where it says File. We'll go to File, Open, and when this pops up, I see a lot of users try to open all their Fusion files like this, but there is a better way to do that, and I'll show you in a little bit here. But generally, when I'm opening a file that was sent to me, I'm going to open from my computer, and I'm just going to pick the step file here and hit open. So now that I have this file open in Fusion, there's a couple ways to do this. So this manufacturing template is something that I use often, and I want to save it, but I don't want to save over it. So I want to be conscious of that. And the way I usually do this is I will save this part, and we can save this. Pick where we wanna save this at. Save it in here. We'll call it part. Save. And then what I'll do is actually just close this file because I want to bring it into this file. And then what I'll do is I'll save a new version of this file so that this one doesn't get kind of corrupted, so I can have it again to use for later. All we'll do here is open this data panel, and this is probably the best way to open a file. Like I said, I see a lot of people go through here and they go to File, Open, and they try to look through here for the parts they're working on. But you'll see, if we get some parts in here, we might have like a bunch of untitles. I don't know what any of these are just by looking at them. And I could certainly guess by looking at the date, but depending on how you have them sorted here in Fusion, and that same main file here, if I scroll down, we'll see that I can see all these untitled files and what they are. So now I can, oh, that's the one I want to open. It looks like my object. And this is a little bit better way than just using that regular file open. But I'm looking for a file called part. So we'll scroll up and try to find it here. It's right here. So all I'm going to do to bring it into this document is just grab it, and I'm going to drag it and let go of it. And what that's going to do is it's going to create an XREF, and it's going to link this file to this part here. Now, what I want to do to not save over my template file is I'm just going to go to File, and I'm going to go to Save As. I don't want to use Save, and this is going to save a different version of this vise and the stock and everything so that it's not linked to the original, so that when I get another job, I can use this again in the future. So we'll go just to Save As here, and then I'm just going to save this as PART, and then I'll do CAM, and that should be good. So now we know what it is. This is the specific manufacturing model for this part. And now I have my part here. Now what I want to do is just join this part to my stock. And there's a bunch of different ways to do this. Because I need to move it in here, I didn't just randomly place it in there. I'm going to use the regular joint command. And what I tend to do is just I'll go to this bottom surface, or I'm looking for something that's about in the center of the part. And you'll notice here that I'm trying to click that little center square that's visible right here. And you see that it keeps going away when I mouse over it. So the trick here is to kind of hover over the surface here and push and hold Control And then that'll leave all those snap points up so that now we can navigate to that one that wouldn't be there if we moved our mouse. So when we click that, that's going to be our first component. And I do always want to pick my first um, part that I actually want to move. I want to pick that first. And then I'm going to pick where I want to move it to, which is here. So I'm going to click it to that center. And now obviously it's not exactly where I want it because I want the part to fit down inside the stock. So I'm just going to go to like a side view here. And what I'll do is I'm just going to drag this down below here. So I see that this part's about 1.1 inches. So I might want to drag it just a little bit lower. And we could zoom in to get a little bit finer control here. Put it about right there. That'll give me some material on the top to face off and whatnot. So we can hit OK there. Now, the big thing here is this stock is a little big for what we're working with. So in this template file that I'll provide, if you go to change parameters, this is going to have a couple things in here that we can modify and adjust. Now, if I change my Y dimension here, let's make this 4.5 inches, and I'm going to hit enter. You'll see that it's going to update that assembly in the background. And the same thing with the Z. So the Z, 2 inches, maybe that's a little big. We can go 1.5 inches. And when I hit enter there, we can see that that adjusts. And we could even change like the parallel height. This vise happens to have some taller jaws in it. But if we wanted to have, maybe like 1 inch parallels, we could just type in 1 and hit enter. And we'll see that it's going to adjust that. The other thing that's in here that's really just for looks is this this parallel hole diameter. We can change that to something like 0.1 or something. We want to change the hole size of the parallels, but that's really just for looks. So we'll put this back to 1.9 because we want to hold on to the bottom. We can put this to something like 0.75. Pretty big. Now that we have this part kind of set up in here, or we're ready to go into the manufacturing workspace and start applying some toolpaths. So we'll just go from design to manufacture. The first thing I want to do here is create a setup. And creating the setup, Fusion's going to get a little confused because I have more than one body on here. And what I want to do is tell Fusion what part I want to work with. That's generally the first thing I do, and then kind of everything will fall from there. So I'm going to go to where it says model, and then I want to pick this part that's inside here, but you can see it's kind of highlighting the stock box that I want to use because I modeled my stock instead of using a bounding body. So what we can do is actually just find a spot where both of those bodies intersect, and I can click and hold. Do that again. I can click and hold on this, and it'll pop up this little box here that'll let me kind of select through things. So if there's other faces or entities behind this, it'll also include them. So that's why I want to get like kind of a decent view. But I'm going to pick this body one because that's what I'm looking for. You can see that my stock mode here is set to a relative size box. Now that's obviously not what I want because in this case I have my stock modeled. So we can go from relative size box down to from solid. Now Fusion's going to wonder what that solid is. So now we can pick it. And now that we have that picked, we're almost ready to go here. Now, in the small chance that our orientation is incorrect, this is one thing that I suggest doing. So maybe we're holding the device like this and we wanted to work on the Z-axis in this orientation. A lot of people will go through here and change this orientation mode, and they'll go through picking. Fusion actually automatically does this. If you just click on the base of the arrow, it'll let us indicate a surface that's normal to a certain direction. We can touch this, and then it'll reorient the axis to be that way for our Z-axis normal. Now, if I want to do the same thing for the X, because maybe my vise is like this in the machine and the X runs, to the right, we can just grab the base of the X arrow and then indicate something straight that's in that direction. And in this case, it's opposite. So all I want to do is hit the head of the arrow to flip it. And then if I'm worried about the position, maybe I'm going to pick up off this top corner. I can just highlight the bulb here, and then I can click on where I want to put that origin. So our origins in Fusion are completely independent of the world origin system or the world coordinate system, which lives in here somewhere. I can turn it on and find it, but you can see it's down there. So we don't have to move the model in the part to that position. We can actually make our world coordinate system independent of this because we can have multiple setups inside of Fusion. So we'll just indicate the surface back, put it where we want it, go back to here. Flip that direction, and we'll probably do a probe operation on this. So I'm going to put it in the top center. So now that we have this operation, the setup pretty much complete here. The only other thing we might want to do or adjust is going to be on this post process page. program name, program comment, and then work coordinate system offset. You'll want to set this to 1, and you can even right click on this and make that the default, because 0 and 1 are both going to be equal to G54. Now, if we did have like maybe 3 of these vices set up in the machine, one thing we could do is just program this one time and then turn on multiple WCS offsets and tell it that we want to increment the offset by 1, and maybe we have 3 instances. So that would give us a G54, a G55, and a G56. If we change the increment offset to 2, this is going to increment the offset number by 2. So in this case, we would have G54, G56, and G58. The last level of control that we have with this is how the tools are ordered. Now, this gets a little confusing if you don't quite understand how it's going to work, but I'll do my best to explain it here. So preserve order is going to run basically G54 all the way through. So imagine we had 3 different tool changes. It's going to do tool 1, 2, and 3 on G54, and then it's going to go back and get tool 1 and start working on G55. If we go to order by operation, what it'll do is imagine we have a face mill facing off the top, and then we do some roughing with that same face mill. Order by operation will face off the top of the part of G54, and then it will face G55 and G56, but then it will lift up and move all the way back to G54 to do the roughing. So it is a little inefficient with its movement. So that's why order by tool is the most efficient way. This would just do all the operations for that tool and then move on to the subsequent parts. In our case, we'll just turn that off. I'm going to hit OK here. And now that we have this, you see that my vice disappeared. So what happened there? There is a setting at the bottom here, sync the view and the visibility with the active setup. And this is a common thing I see happen. So it's kind of why I did it. If we go to where it says setup here and we open the setup back up. If we go down to where it says fixture, this is also another common thing I see with Fusion. I want to define my fixture, right? So let's go to this work holding folder, and I have an orange device in there, and it looks like I want everything in there. So I'm just going to highlight this level. And now when I hit OK, you'll see that it's going to turn that on, right? And it shows the visibility. Now, one thing I do want to make super clear, because I think this is a confusing point for Fusion. By selecting this fixture, this doesn't necessarily mean that Fusion is going to try to avoid this fixture during any toolpath creation. And this is a common thing that I do see. So if you do have instances where the tool is going to come down and touch the jaws, because you select this here, Fusion's not necessarily going to limit that. So that would be something you'd have to limit on your own. What this setting really does is when we go through toolpath simulation and we see the tool collide with this, Fusion is going to collision check against this and show you there is a collision. If we don't have this object selected here, Fusion will not see it and it will not highlight any red collisions there. So that's just something real quick to understand about that fixture setting. So now that we have this part, there's a bunch of different, I mean, there's a million different ways we could go about machining this part. My favorite way would probably be to start with a 3D adaptive clearing toolpath. And this will give us, some nice trochoidal milling. And this will really help us kind of capture our intent if we want to save this for a template down the road. Because 2D toolpaths need to be built up and kind of told to do something, and they're really only going to do what you tell it. So if you tell it to do the wrong thing, it is going to do the wrong thing. 3D toolpaths, however, are really kind of the opposite. By default, they kind of know the stock, they know what the geometry is in the case of this roughing operation here, and it's going to try to machine whatever we put in there. So without having many selections in here, we can just create the toolpath. I like to drag this little window out. It helps new users kind of figure out what these settings are. So you see here, it shows little icons. If you drag this and make this a little bit bigger though, it's going to show you what these pages mean. And the page structure here in Fusion is really what I think is really nice for new users, because this never really changes. There is a case with like drilling where we're going to lose a page, because with drilling, we don't have passes or linking. We just start and end on cycle. So that's what we'll end up having. So the first page here is always going to be our tool, basically what our tool is, tool selection. and then what type of coolant we're using, if there's a preset. And then in the case of 3D toolpaths, there's collision avoidance here. And this will show you how to, kind of get basically if we hover over anything here, this will show us a nice dialog box of what's going on. But this will basically give us our collision avoidance. So maybe we want to pull the tool away, or maybe I want to just know how long the tool needs to be. I can set those things up here, and then Fusion will automatically do that. Another great thing about Fusion is if you're learning Fusion or you're new to Fusion and you don't know what a certain setting is, generally hovering over something is a really good way to find out some options, or at least a brief description of what that setting does. But if you need more information, there's a really good kind of call out here. This little black eye, when you click this, it'll actually take you to the product documentation page for that specific toolpath, and it'll break down every setting. So if you ever want to link out and learn more about those specific settings, you can do that there. The next page is geometry. This is always going to be what we're cutting. Like I said, in this case here, we're not going to be telling it to do anything, because basically the only control we want to tell it is how far down it is allowed to go, which is set on the heights page here. So the heights are going to be like, where's the clearance plane? So where's the toolpath initial point going to be? Where's it going to retract to in between cuts? Where's the top? So where's it going to start looking for to make cuts from? And then where's the absolute bottom it's allowed to go? In this case, for this roughing toolpath, I might want to go a little bit below here, so I can drag that, below, as long as I'm not touching the device jaws here. On the next page, passes. This is generally going to be what we're doing when we're cutting. So our optimal load here, I might want to change this depending on the machine I'm using. But we can go to like 0.1. And again, if you just hover over this, it'll explain kind of what that setting is. So this is going to be our constant radial load for this specific toolpath. And then down here we have maximum roughing step down, and this says fine step down, but really in the case of this toolpath, it's a step up. So it's going to look to do this cut first, and then do this. And you can also see that in the ordering here if you look at the toolpath information. So we can go to where it says tool, and I'll pick a tool here. We'll go to my library and we'll grab a 1/2 inch end mill. So I don't have any presets in here. So one thing about creating tools, if you're going to be creating tools in Fusion, what I suggest is go to the Fusion library and look for the tool type. So go to the filters up here, go to milling. We're looking for like a 1/2 inch end mill. So if I go to flat end mill here, see there's a bunch of tools here, but what's unique about these is if we copy one of these tools, they have a bunch of cutting parameters here for different materials and feeds and speeds. They're not going to get you to the moon and back the quickest, but they'll be a good base, starting point for you. So we can grab this tool here, and it's going to place that in our document. And then these tools, because they have all those different cutting parameters for our feed and speeds, we can just select that here. So depending on our material, we're doing aluminum roughing, so we can set that there, and it'll set those. But you can see if we change this to like stainless steel, for example, you can see those feed rates are going to slow way down. So the last page here that I kind of, I guess, skipped on by going to the tool here is the linking page. And this is going to be how is the tool getting in and out of the cut. So if we're, retracting, if we're staying down while we're doing that, some of those things, basically our lead in angles, and all that. And then if we want to suggest any pre-drill positions or where we want it to enter from. And in this case, I'm just going to hit OK. So it's telling me the maximum step down is greater than the tool flute length. So there is a warning here. So I can look right here where it says that. If we look at our tool, we'll see that the tool, we're going to go to edit. You can take a look at the cutter and see the tool flute length is only 1 inch. So I'm going to make this 1.5. That's what I want it to be. And then we need that to be sticking out like 1.7. Then the same thing with the shoulder length. Generally want those. I like to have these two match, unless we're working with like a relieved cutter. I want to see this portion be the part that has flutes on it. So here we'll hit accept, and then we'll select it. So now we can see that's in the document. And this maximum roughing step down here, we can right click, edit the expression, it just says tool step down. So we could type something in here like tool and then underscore. And oh, I see a bunch of these pop up, so I could just scroll through here. You type tool flute length because that's essentially what we're looking for. Yep, there. And then I'm going to do times 0.95, which will give me 95% of whatever length of tool that I have. So now I do have 1.5 inch length to cut. This is going to give me that delineation that I need. We'll go to hit OK and optimal load change. So we can also set this back to 0.1 and hit OK. And then that's going to set our toolpath. Now, what's really important about this toolpath and the way this is generated and why I'm kind of using a toolpath like this is if the stock changes or the part changes, once I've created this setup here, we could go back into design real quick and give this kind of a ridiculous y-axis. We'll say maybe it's 8 inches. But you can see that it's going to split the part in that direction. And even if we change the X here to 12, make it bigger, we have a much bigger stock size now, but we're working with the same part. So because we have this kind of dynamic setup here, we can see that my setup obviously shows my stock and where it is, shows my part, it knows my part and what it is, but we see the old toolpath here, and it does show that the toolpath is out of date. So we can just right click on this and hit generate, and this is going to regenerate based on the stock that we have selected. So because Fusion sees all those things, it's easy for us to go in there and make adjustments either to the stock or to the part. Maybe I produce the first part and I measure something on it and I go, oh, this wall needs to have a little bit more material on it. I can go into design, I can do a press pull, I can pull on the wall, I can adjust the feature and then just regenerate my toolpaths. And I don't have to start over, linking or having to modify things manually. So the next toolpath I would probably do here, now that we have this roughed out, would be like a facing operation on the top and then maybe finishing some of these pockets on the bottom. And one of the ways I like to do this rather quickly is just to come in here and use 2D Pocket. Now, by default, 2D Pocket does have stock to leave on. So I'm just going to turn that off. So it would be leaving some material, and we want to use this for a finishing pass. So for my pocket selections here, we'll grab the top. We can face it, but we can also grab the rest of these pockets here on the part, even if they're open like that. And we'll go ahead and look at our passes. So we're stepping over 475. This is a 1/2 inch flat end mill. That might be a little bit more than I'm comfortable with. So I'll put it to 0.4. And then that's going to go through and do our pocketing operations here. I'm not a big fan of those spirals. So this is the nice thing about Fusion and getting in there. So a spiral would be like a lead in. So we can go to where it says linking. We can go to the ramp type here and we can just say plunge because we would have roughed that out already. So now it gets rid of those helixes leading in there. And let's simulate this and take a look at it. No, we forgot our stock is really big. So I'm just going to hit go to the next operation. That'll show me the resulting stock. And then we can hit play here. And I have it on comparison. So this is going to look to show us anything in blue that still has material on it. Anything in green is going to be to our finish tolerance. And then anything in red would be gouged. Just play through this. We're looking to essentially complete majority of those faces on the interior. Looks like I need to do a contour pass on the outside, some 3D finishing here on these angles, and then drill the holes. Oh, and we forgot the pocket there. So we can do that next. So we'll just go in here and we'll go to 2D contour. And what I want to do is go around the part. So I'm just going to come here and try to grab the outside of the part. And you'll see that Fusion grabs that all together. And that's one way that is pretty easy. And this is usually how I use Fusion. There could be specific situations though, where maybe I only want to cut this right end and the left end because I have the part hanging out of the vise. So how would I select that if every time I go in here and pick this, it just closes the chain for me? Well, the reason it does that is because by default, it is trying to close the chain. So if we hover over this and click it once, it'll turn red and give us basically the contour editor. And you can see the settings here. So it's set to close contour. And if we look at the contour specifically, the blue area of the contour is what we manually chose. The black area is essentially what Fusion thought we wanted. So it's trying to essentially close the profile for us. So in this case, if we wanted to maybe just do one of these ends, we could say open contour, and then I could come over here and pick the end. But I see that Fusion's trying to continue it to my original selection. So I probably would have wanted to start with a different selection. And there's a bunch of little contours in here. I don't need to go through and pick all of these. That would be a little redundant. Fusion's generally smart enough to understand what we want. So if I pick the start and then pick the end here, you can see that Fusion chains in between there. And if I want to accept this, I can hit accept. So that would be good for doing like that side. And if I go to this other side, a nice way to default to the single contour, which really in this case is kind of redundant, but maybe sometimes you want to just do a single contour. If you hold down Alt, that's essentially what it does is it'll change to single contour or open contour. And then what we can do is, go in there and we still have to edit this even if we pick it as a single, but we can at least see our starting point there. And then we can choose the end and hit accept. So if I hold, Alt, and I click one of these longer lines, we'll see that it's just going to add that line. And this is generally what I want to see. I usually don't want to have a high number of contours here. Generally, Fusion is smart enough to figure out what you want. So if I did do, if we come over here and I'm going to hold down Alt, and then I'm going to pick this and this and this and this and all these. You can see that's 9 chains, but really it's only one chain, right? And if I hit OK here, Fusion should be smart enough to know that we want just a smooth, continuous toolpath, but that's not always the case, depending on the geometry. And certainly if I had one of those directions the wrong way, which Fusion is really good at picking the direction the proper way, but if I wanted to flip one, I could put the arrow on the other side and it'll do that. Now when I hit OK here, you can see that it is going to split that chain and essentially just ruining my part there by doing another toolpath inside of that. That's not what I want. So let's go back and fix this. Hopefully that explains a little bit of the contour selection. But we'll just go through here and pick that and pick the bottom and hit OK. That'll give us our result there. And the reason Fusion is doing that is because we have the active view. So when I'm hitting that with the toolpath, it's trying to orient the view back to the home. So we can right click on just this operation and hit simulate. And Fusion will show us kind of where we are in the process as long as we have the in process stock generation turned on. So we don't have to generate through all the other toolpaths. We can hit play here. That's going to come down and clean that up for us. Pretty nice. And this is going to go around the part. And yeah, that looks pretty good. So we can then focus on these areas. Now I see a lot of people do this, and it's really up to you. It's your preference, but a lot of people would probably want to fill these holes with surface for doing some surfacing on there, and that's certainly something you could do. We go to manufacture. We can go back to design here. We can go to surface, and there's a patch tool. We probably want to turn off our stock so we don't see that. If we just pick this chain, you can see that Fusion is going to put a surface there to kind of cover that up. So then we can utilize this to not dive in that hole with our tool. And that's pretty beneficial. And that's certainly one way to do it. The only issue I have with this is depending on your machine and kind of how dynamic it is, this might result in more toolpath points at this position, which could lead to your machine kind of slowing and starting or kind of stuttering at those points. So the way that I like to repair these is actually not that way. I do it in solid. But what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this body, and this might give me a little issue here, but we can hit copy and then we can hit we can't. I'm not having a paste option, but let's do copy paste. So I'm pasting a new component in there. So you can see I have two of these parts. I have instance number 1 and instance number 2. The second one I want to break because I don't want to have it linked to the original. And then I'm going to turn this one off. And again, we'll turn stock so you can see it. And generally when I have like a manufacturing model here that I'm going to edit, I like to change the color. So I'm going to go to modify, go to appearance, and then I'm going to filter the color. So usually I just grab whatever, random one in here, go to metal, aluminum, and just drag it on there. And that'll give me that color. Now that's not the color I want to view it as. I like to keep things kind of the same, so I know they're manufacturing models. So I'm going to make this like a pretty bright green, ugly green there, so that I know it's a manufacturing model, and hit close. Now instead of patching all of these and creating kind of more surfaces and more points in our toolpath, what I'm going to do is just click on it and just hit delete, and it's just going to delete those holes, essentially close them up. Now I have a smooth surface here to work with. So now we can go from design back to manufacture. See if I highlight this, it's going to switch the part out for me because we do have those two different parts in here and it was viewing the one. But what I can do is go to a 3D and then I'm going to use a parallel for this strategy and we'll pick a different tool. And what I'm going to do here is I'm going to swap the model out. I'm going to turn this model on. Now, this doesn't mean we're going to use this model. We have to tell Fusion that we want to use a different model than the model we chose in our setup. So on the geometry page, go to where it says model, and I'm actually going to pick this I'm going to pick this model. We can either pick it by clicking it there, or we can click it in the browser. And what this will do, it's also asking me if I want to include the setup model. In this case, because the setup model is exactly the same, I can either have this on or off. It's really not going to make a difference. And then what we want to do is generally what I say starting out with 3D Toolpaths, and I learned this from my buddy John Saunders. Just don't change a whole lot of settings. It would be really bad if we changed 15 settings in here and then tried to generate a toolpath and didn't get a result. So if I just hit OK on it, I can kind of see what it's doing, and then I can gather the information I need to make the adjustments and then do them. So in this case, looking at this, I see that it's not just doing the area I want; it's doing the entire part. I see the step over is kind of loose, and it's going in the wrong direction I want. So there's three things I need to adjust. I'm going to go in here. I'm going to go to my passes. It was going the wrong direction, so I want to switch that to be 90 degrees instead of 0 degrees, which will rotate my toolpath. Again, if we hover over this, Fusion will kind of show you that. And then my step over was pretty loose, so I want to make this pretty tight. So I'm going to go 0.01. And then I want it to stay on certain areas. So there's a couple ways to do that. We can go to geometry and go to set right now to the silhouette. So we can see again, if we hover over it, the silhouette's going to kind of make it a shape of the part, but we want to confine it to specific areas. So what we might want to do is one way to do it, the easiest way is probably to go to avoid touch surface. And we want to tell it to touch the surface. So this works basically in two different ways. If we tell it to, if we leave this off, any surface we touch, Fusion's not going to machine. So you can see right now, if I click just this surface and hit OK, Fusion is going to do everything on the part except that surface. Now that's obviously not what I want. So if we double click this and go back here, I want it just to touch the surface. And then Fusion is essentially going to generate the entire toolpath still, but it's going to trim off anything that doesn't touch that area here that we have selected. And we can see there, that's what we want. So we want to apply that to the areas that we have over here. We'll just edit this toolpath. Again, I'm going to swap the model here for visibility. And then what I want to do is say touch surface, and I want to touch these surfaces. Machine. And just hit OK. Now we can see we're getting a nice toolpath on there. And then we do have this kind of random start there. We could have probably drilled that from the beginning, but we'll just use an end mill to make these. So we'll go into 4 and switch to a different tool. Select, and then all we need to do here is come down and just grab that bore. This is one of the toolpaths in Fusion that will show you a preview of the toolpath when you start, and that's kind of unique for some of the toolpaths that have simpler generation. Not all toolpaths do this. If we go to the side here, I might want to see through this model. So a good way to do that is to go to display settings and go to visual style and change to wireframe. And then I really want this to start a little bit above where it needs to make contact, and I want it to go below the hole a little bit. So we'll go to the heights page, and we'll say we want it to start 20 thou above, and we want it to go maybe minus 100 thou below. So now I can get a good idea even through the part what I need to do here. And then another quick tip here is on the settings, visual style, you see there's some Control 6, Control 7. Those are keyboard shortcuts to switch back and forth between these. So without doing anything, pushing a button, I'm just going to go on my keyboard here and hit Control 6. And you'll see that's going to set it back to the way that it was. Now, that's what I need for that one toolpath. I'm going to go to geometry, and we could manually pick all these, but we could just say select same diameter, and then Fusion will go through and look for the other holes that are that same size. That looks good there. We can hit OK. And then the last thing we need to do is just drill these holes. I don't happen to know the size of these. So a good way to do this is come over here and click this. Now, sometimes in the bottom right, if we're in the modeling view, it'll show us a size over there. But if we don't have that, we can go up to where it says inspect. And we can see here that it's giving me the radius and the diameter. So it looks like it's probably a millimeter size metric. I can't remember what one is just above 5/16, but we'll just drill this with a 5/16. So see it's 3 314, and we'll go to drill. And I'm going to go to the tool library again. Now, I don't have any drills in my tool library, so I'm just going to check and see what Fusion has. Go to the filters here, hole making, and then I want to look for just drills. I can sort it here by diameter, but generally I just scroll down and we're looking for 5/16. Right here, 5/16 drill. Now I can hit select on that, and Fusion did something. It automatically picked these holes for me. Normally it's not going to do that. We go to geometry here. The normal mode for Fusion for the drilling toolpath is selected faces. So this is what it would default to. And then you'd have to do the same thing like we did with the bore, where you pick this, then you could say, pick the same diameter, and it'll grab them all. Now what's unique is in here under selected faces, if I go to diameter range, you can see that it's automatically pulling some numbers in here for diameter range that are based on my drill. So if I right click on this, go to edit expression, we can see I have that same thing where I typed in the tool diameter in this case, and I'm multiplying that by 0.98, which is effectively giving me a negative 2% variance to my tool. And I just did the inverse on this. So if we say edit expression, it says times 1.02. It's giving me a 2% positive range from our 312.5 size drill here. So you can set this to whatever you want. I like to see this as a a regular thing, and this is how I usually like to do my drill tool paths. And if this isn't what I want, it's pretty easy just to manually change it and then select the ones that I want. But the holes are modeled to the same size in the part. This is a good way to do that. Now that we have those, one thing I might want to change is the cycle. We can set this to like a chip breaking, set our pecs and everything there, and okay. And let's simulate this. We'll simulate the whole thing. Oh, my stock is too big, so let's fix that. Let's put that back. Go back to design, and we can make this 5, 7. Oh, did that incorrectly. Turn on the visibility. You can see how I messed that up. Let's turn on stock. And it looks like I broke something, so maybe we will just leave it then. Now that we have all these tool paths here, and click on this and hit simulate. Not quite past the roughing because that takes a little bit, but speed through this and just make sure we're getting the majority of the part we need to. See, that finishing looks pretty good. I do see an issue. There's a little kind of cusp at the bottom here. There's a setting we can turn on to fix that. So everything but that little cusp looks good. In our parallel toolpath, there's a setting in here. If I right click on this, if we look from the top and look at the physical toolpath, you can see that it's kind of stopping at the edge there. It is kind of looping, but if we look at it from the side, I think it's lifting up and kind of not touching that, but it essentially stops at the boundary there. So to fix this, double click on here, go to geometry. There is a contact point boundary. If we hover over this setting, it kind of shows us essentially almost the same situation here. So we see with this setting not checked and disabled, it's not going to allow the tool to go outside of the boundary that we have picked. And what'll happen there is it'll leave a little cusp like we saw. So turning this on will essentially allow the tool to finish the contact, like what we see on the top right, and kind of violate that boundary a little bit, but just stay to the surface. And then it actually does the inverse on the top, where we would essentially roll the tool over the top where we have that boundary, and this would just trim it to where the tool finishes the contact, which is shown on the bottom. So turn that on. Okay. And that looks good, but that gave us some other problems. So one way to fix this, I kind of call this like a waterfall. Now we do have something in the manufacturing extension, which kind of gives a little bit more tools and control to a user if they need it in Fusion. And this is one kind of quick and dirty way to do it, but there's a trim toolpath feature in here that's really good for kind of cutting this out. So if I don't want the toolpath to go down like that, it really kind of looks ugly. Based on my view, I could just pop open this trim toolpath, just say, oh, we want to trim this to that area, and I want to keep the outside boundary in this case, or the inside boundary. And then we can say Okay. We'll see that it's going to regenerate that toolpath with those trimmed off. Then we'd have to do that again from this side, or we could just add it in that original one. But something unique about this trim toolpath is this is going to create a essentially a feature in like the toolpath timeline essentially down on the bottom here. And it's going to show the edits. So you see there's a little pencil shows that it's modified. When I click on this tool, it does show me a little timeline, a little toolpath timeline down here. It shows me those specific edits. So I have my 2 trims that are on here, and I can add as many and stack as many trims on there as I want. I see there's maybe some other areas here that I might want to adjust. Um, let's go ahead and try to make this toolpath the way I would normally do it, to get a little bit better selection here. And this honestly might work. We delete these. So we can right click on this and say, go down here and hit delete. And click delete again. If you have one, there's a discard edits dialog there. But generally what I also like to do is the tolerance in which this model is tessellated, which might sound super confusing. Kind of shown here, I guess, with this line. Fusion's going to make basically a tessellation in the background, and this is the tolerance for that. Based on the smooth geometry we have here, some of that might violate that. That's why the tool is trying to dive down there. So based on this toolpath setting, or the tolerance setting there, we can go here to this additional offset, and I can just make this negative by that amount. Hit OK, and that trims it off. So that's one way to do it if we're using or trim some of it off. But the best way I like to do it is instead of doing the avoid touch surfaces, turn this off, and I just use a selection instead. So we can use even this model. It really doesn't matter. But we'll go through and just pick these areas on the model, and I'm just picking something and then editing the contour so that I have a clean geometry here. So kind of a little bit more perfect selection, not based on a random tool contact. And now that we have those added in there, you can see those with this setting and the avoid touch surfaces turned off now, we should get a super clean toolpath. We don't get any waterfalls in any of those areas. You see they're pretty clean. So it looks like we're good. We can double check this again. We can hit simulate, and I'm just going to hit play to the end of the toolpath. That'll just start to generate the model if that's how I viewed it. And that to me looks good. I'm ready to post process. Now, the one thing that I think is important is a lot of people go in here and they'll go to post process, and they might edit and change, some of the settings in here. Now, Fusion, every time it's updated, it does dump in the new versions of all of these posts. So if you do make these settings and you notice, when Fusion updates, it kind of erases these settings. It does do that because it might be working with a different post. So the best way here is to use like the cloud posts, but we're actually going to not use this post process dialog at all. Better way to do this is to right click on the setup and say you want to create an NC program. And essentially what this is going to do is it's going to make an NC program in our browser here, but this is going to save all these settings instead of just being kind of modal to this document or to the document that we have up, whatever was previous we were working on. It's going to save all these settings, the post, and especially where we want to output it to. It's going to save that to the document. So if I'm posting this to a specific machine and I have that machine networked and I'm saving it there, it's going to pull this up again when I open up this program. The other thing that this does, lets us select, obviously all the same things. It lets us adjust those settings. It is going to save these. So like G0 I want to have on, G187 I want to have on. I like parametric feed. So I'll turn that on. Change our sequence numbers. I want it to start at 1 and I want it to increment by 1. And it's going to save all these settings. And under operations, maybe sometime we run all these operations and we want to repost this and I just want to post the parallel. You could certainly just click on this and hit post process and go through the way you're probably familiar with. But in here, what we could do is just uncheck the ones we don't want to post. And now when I hit post on this, it's just going to post that one operation. And it does show these, like for the patterns and everything, it shows all the tool changes and essentially what the work offset is if we had multiples in here. So this is a really nice way to see this. This is something you don't get in the regular post process. You just have to kind of hope that you had all the settings right because you don't have any way to visually check this. So we can hit OK there. That creates that NC program. You can double click on this and rename it. So we'll say op1. And then when we right click on this and hit post process, we can post that. The other nice feature about this is if we are doing multiple toolpaths, if we have maybe a pattern, a component pattern or something, we hit simulate, it'll simulate on all those different parts. So it's going to kind of show you how it's going to move in between them. So we can right click on this, hit post process. It automatically posted it for me. So we can say view NC code, and we can see the NC code here. I see the parameters like I like them. Maybe I want to check this out real quick just before I send it to the machine. A good way to do that is under utilities. I don't think I have it installed, but I'll show you guys where to get it. Fusion 360 App Store here. When you open this up, we're looking for something called NC Viewer. Now, this is like a free G-code like backplotter, and we can actually use this inside of Fusion. So if we click it, it's available for Windows or for Mac. We can just download it and add it to our Fusion. Now, I don't have it added to mine, but we can also just go to ncviewer.com, and then we can find that toolpath that we just posted here. We can just drag it into here and let go, and then it's going to plot that for us. Now, there's some settings in here you can change. So this is kind of cool. It'll show you rapid movements, or maybe we don't want to see the toolpath points. Maybe we do want to see the rapid movements. And you can move this around by clicking. The controls are a little bit different than Fusion, but you can zoom in on this and whatnot. And the nice thing is maybe I want to go to this front view and click on part of this bore toolpath, click on it. It's going to take me in the program where that comes from, and that might not be super useful, but what I like to see is the digital readout. So this will show me essentially how deep it's supposed to be from my setup. So I can see it's going -1¼ inches there. So that can be pretty useful for identifying maybe how deep something's going to be going at a certain point, or if I have it programmed right, and checking that out. So you can click on really any of these points here, but if we want to, go to the beginning, the top, and you can also edit this and then save it out so it has those controls too. The only other thing I want to show you guys is a setup sheet. So we might want to have a setup sheet for this. We can just pick a good view here. You can right click on this and use the setup sheet option. Now there is a setting in preferences to use essentially like kind of a newer version of this, but we'll look at this one for now, and then I can show you what the other one looks like. So this is going to pop out to like an HTML, give us our setup sheet, show us our different tools and everything that we need, and then show us all the operations that we have there. There is a way in here to go to your preferences. And I'm pretty sure this is the case, but there is a setup sheet with NC programs. And this is not something that I guess is public yet. So this is something that'll be coming in the future, but you'll essentially be able to open up those setup sheets and be able to adjust the configuration of the toolpaths inside here in Fusion and then output them to a PDF. So I apologize for maybe showing or talking about that a little bit early. But yeah, if there's any questions, you guys can feel free either in YouTube or in the Zoom to put them in the chat, and we'll try to get to them now. And if there's not a whole lot of questions, we will just wrap it up. I really appreciate you guys' time. I hope this helped with getting up to speed with some workflows inside of Fusion 360. The only other thing I might suggest is if we have these toolpaths and this is something we're going to repeat often, we can shift select these toolpaths and we can add them to a new template. So we can store them as a template, and templates don't have to just be a single toolpath. It can be a group of toolpaths like this. And if this is, or if I have similar, parts like this, or this is something I do all the time and I just want to paste this and kind of adjust it, we can go from there. And then, like I said, some of these toolpaths like adaptive, we adjust the model or the stock. This toolpath is obviously going to update to that. So thanks everybody for joining. Really appreciate your time. We will wrap it up, and everybody have a good one. Take care.